Welcome to qiphyedu. Today we'll be looking at Economics A2 level, Specimen Paper 3 for examination from 2023. Alright, let's start. Okay, so let's take a look at the first question. It says, a project has a social cost of 100 million, a private cost of 40 million, and an external benefit of 20 million. Its net social value is 0. And what can be concluded about the project? Okay, so as you can see here, we already know the cost of this project. The total, the social cost, which is also, I'm just going to use SC here as the abbreviation, which is basically private cost plus external cost would be your social cost. So we know that our social cost is 100 million, and we know that our private cost is 40 million. So we can just put 40 into our private cost, and then 100 into our social cost. This means that our external cost would be 60 million. All right. So if you look at the four options here, it says that our external cost is greater than our external benefit, which is correct because the external cost here is 60 million and our external benefit is 20 million. All right, 60, which is more than 20. Okay, then that means that this is correct. But let's look at the other three options here and see why are they wrong, or whether or not they're correct. B, it says that private cost is greater than external cost. Okay, just now I already mentioned, private cost is 40 million, external cost is 60 million. So private cost is actually less than your external cost, so this is not the answer. And C, it says private cost is greater than private benefit. Now we don't exactly know what the private benefit is. We know that our private cost is 40 million, so we cannot conclude that private cost is greater than private benefit, which is why it's wrong as well. And D, it says that our social cost is greater than social benefit. Our social cost is 100 million, but we do not know what's the social cost. Therefore, based on the question itself, is actually not that predictable. Therefore, the answer here that we can use to conclude this project is basically A, which is external cost is greater than external benefit. All right. Okay, for question 2, the diagram shows the cost and revenue curves for a firm, and at which point does allocated efficiency occur? So allocated efficiency occurs when P equals to MC. So if you look at this graph here, this diagram here, you see that the point where P equals to MC would be this point, which is at price A. Therefore, the answer here will be A. If you look at D is when MC equals to MR. This is profit maximization and no efficiency occurs here. And then if it's C, you realize that it's when the MC curve touches the AC curve. So this one is also not the answer. And for B, you see it's AC equals to AR, which means that the firm is only breaking even. They're earning a normal profit. So that's why this is also not the answer. Question 3, a government is considering building a new railway line in its country. It has to choose one of the 4 high-speed routes. The benefits and costs of each route are shown below, and which route should be chosen. So this is cost-benefit analysis. You choose the one that provides you with the most private benefits, external benefits, and also the less private costs and external costs. Okay, so judging by the 4 options here, D would be immediately ruled out because the private cost and the external cost is the highest. So D is incorrect. And then if we look at C, you can see that for C, if you were to combine both the private cost and external cost, our social cost would be 1.2 billion. And then for the private benefits would be 18 plus 12, we get 30 billion. Alright, and then if you look at B, the total social benefit you get will be 38 billion. And then for the private cost and external cost combined together, you get 2 billion. And then for A, that will be 34 billion for social benefits, and then social cost would be 1.4 billion. So if you look at these 3 options here, and then let's just put back D just for comparison. So D would be 38 and 6. So if you see here, C would be ruled out because even though the private cost and external cost combined is lower than private benefit, external benefit, but if you compare it with B, A, and D, these three routes, they actually offer higher private benefits and external benefits. So that's why C will be ruled out as well. Now, if you compare D and B or even A, of course, in this case, right, the external benefit and private benefits combined, A would also be ruled out as well because it is lower than B and D. So that leaves us with either B or D. And if you compare B and D, of course, the private benefits and external benefits are the same, but then the private cost and external cost would be relatively lower for B instead of D. Therefore, answer here would be B, right? So you try to maximize your benefits and lower your costs as much as possible when it comes to cost-benefit analysis. Okay, question 4. The table shows the total utility gained by a consumer as they consume more apples. At which level of consumption would the marginal utility be 0? Alright, so to calculate marginal utility, that's basically the additional utility provided by consuming additional unit of a good. So here, if you have one apple consumed, it's 10 for its marginal utility. If it's the second one, it will be 8, and the third one will be 6, then the fourth one will be 4, then 2, then 0. Because 30 and then it still remains at 30. So at which level of consumption would the marginal utility be 0? The answer here would be D, because at the 6th unit, your total utility is still 30 and your marginal utility is not increasing. Question 5, in the diagram, I is a consumer initial indifference curve. Point M is the consumer's initial equilibrium. JK and JL are budget lines, and MN is the substitution effect of a fall in the price of good X. If good X is a given good, which point will the consumer's new equilibrium point after the fall in the price will be the consumer's new equilibrium point after the fall in the price of good X? Okay, so good X now, there's a drop in price, so it is now at point, instead of JK, it's now JL, and then MN is the substitution effect in the fall in the price. So now we know that good X is a given good. Okay, so if good X is a given good, which in this case would also mean that it is not normal good, alright? So that means that when there's an increase in the price of this good, alright, it will actually result not increase, but there's a decrease in the price of this good. That means that you'll be consuming less of the product. And that means that since you're consuming less of the product, the original point initial equilibrium is at point M, as you can see. So if the price drops, that means that the quantity would also drop as well. So in this case, if the quantity also drops, that means that the answer will not be D and it will also not be C, but rather it will have to be either B or A. But then B, as you can see here, it's on the same it's actually the same quantity as M. Therefore, the option here that when there's a decrease in price would provide lesser, or that means that you'll choose less of good X because the given good will only be at point E. So the answer here would be A. Alright. Question 6. What is an example of horizontal integration? Okay, vertical integration, or in this case, let's say it's vertical integration. It's basically when you merge different production processes. Like different companies, they have different, they produce things, but it's like let's say, for example, you are producing a product. Let's say you are a producer of, let's say, good X, for example. Then you need to sell the product. Then maybe you sell it on eBay or Amazon. Then that would be vertical integration, right? Vertical forward integration. And then horizontal integration is basically when you merge the same, the companies that they're doing the same things, right? Like for example, maybe these two companies are just producing the same things and you merge them together. So here, if you look at the 4 options, A, it says a bank takes over a travel agent. This is incorrect because a bank and a travel agent, they are 2 different things. So this one is not horizontal or even vertical integration. Alright. And B, it says a car manufacturer buys a component supplier. This one is a vertical backwards integration. So this one is not correct. And then C, a cotton mill doubles its output of existing products. This one is also not integration. So the answer here should be D, 2 breweries merge, because they're producing the same things. Alright, so this is the answer. Question 7, the diagram shows a profit maximizing monopolist. And what would be the change in price if this monopolist changed from profit maximization to revenue maximization? Revenue maximization is basically when MR equals to 0. Okay, so MR equals to 0, so that will be at the point S. Originally, if it's profit maximization, it would be MC equals to MR, so it would be at point U, so it would be U to S, so answer is, so it will be, U would be where the point cuts MC equals to, will be at the point where MC cuts MC equals to MR, but then you'll be selling at the price of R, so that will be from R to S, so answer is A. Okay. Question 8, the goal of firm X is to make a minimum acceptable level of profit, and what does this describe? So minimum acceptable level of profit, this one would be profit satisficing, so answer is B. Profit maximization is to make maximum profit, revenue maximization is to make maximum revenue, sales maximization is basically when you maximize your volume. Alright, that is so basically. Question 9, a monopoly firm makes only normal profit in the long run, and what is most likely to explain this? So A says the firm has decreasing long run average cost. If there's long run average cost, there'll be a profit. B, the firm is a public company with numerous shareholders, they'll be making super normal profit by now. C, the firm is owned by a small number of financial institutions. This is not the answer. And D, the market in this industry is highly contestable, which results in the firm having to reduce the price in order to maintain competitiveness. So this is the answer. Okay, for question 10, the diagram shows the average fixed cost, average variable cost, and average total cost curves which are the same for three firms, X, Y, and Z. dx, dy, and dz are the three respective demand curves which are different for the three firms, and all three firms seek to make a profit, and which statement is not correct. Okay, so let's look at the four options. A, it says firm X will choose not to produce at all. This is correct, because the demand curve is below the ABC and also, it's below the ABC, AFC, and ATC. So if they were to produce, they'll be incurring a loss. And B, it says firm Y is likely to operate in the long run, but not in the short run. Okay, so if you look at the demand curve for Y, if they were to produce a small quantity, which is normally what will happen in the short run, they would be at a point where their average fixed cost would be much higher. But then in the long run, the average variable cost would be much higher compared to its average fixed cost. So basically, their average fixed cost will be lower than the average variable cost. So they could change their average variable cost. So to say that firm Y would be to operate in the long run but not in the short run is actually incorrect. But if you were to say that firm Y is going to operate in the short run but not in the long run, then this is correct. Because like what I mentioned just now, you see that in the short run, the average fixed cost is slightly higher. But then in the short run, you can see that the average fixed cost will drop all the way to the point where it actually meets the ABC curve. Okay, so they will still be able to produce specific quantities. But then after a point, let's say like for example this point, then it starts to increase, and then the ABC curve and ATC curve will all increase. So when it increases, then yes, they would incur a loss. So that's why B is not correct. D, it says firm Z will operate in both the short run and long run. Well, this is correct because as you can see here, in the long run, the demand curve is basically already above both the ABC and the AFC curve, and it technically already touches the ATC curve, so it would be able to operate in both the short run and also the long run. Alright, so answer is B. Question 11. When a firm increases all its inputs fourfold, its output increases threefold. And what does this illustrate? Okay, so you increase your inputs by fourfold and you increase your output by threefold. That means that there is a decrease in your output. Okay, so A, it says decreasing marginal cost. This is definitely wrong, right? B, it says decreasing returns of scale. This is correct. And C, it says economies of scale. This is incorrect. this is not economy of scale. This is because economy of scale is basically when you are able to increase your output when there's an increase in the scale production. But in this case, you realize that there is no increase in the scale production, but rather a decrease. So C is incorrect because of that. And D says the law of diminishing returns. Law of diminishing returns is basically when the capital that you have is by increasing your by increasing your labor, you won't be able to get higher returns. Rather than you're getting diminishing returns because of your limitations in your capital goods and all those. So D is incorrect because of that. So answer is B. Question 12. Which characteristic of an industry works towards reducing the barriers to entry for new firms? So reducing the barriers to entry for new firms. A says significant advertising expenditure. This is incorrect. And B, same thing, economy of scale is also not correct because for new firms, normally they'll be startups. So if they're normally startups, they won't enjoy economy of scale in the beginning because they are not able to expand their scale production, right? And advertising expenditure will only allow the firms that are already in the market in the first place to be benefiting, not new firms. And C says the absence of large costs associated with investment in capital assets. This one is correct because in the absence of large costs, at least for new firms, they would be able to invest in capital assets at a lower price. So that's why this is correct. And D says the possession by existing firms of legal rights. If there's legal rights, then firms have to purchase the patents, or maybe rights to the patents. If they were to do so, they won't have enough money that would be the sunk cost for them. So that would be increasing barriers to entry. So answer here will be C. Question 13. A country has a negative income tax. The curve NT in the diagram shows the country's initial tax schedule. A change in the tax rate causes the schedule to shift to NT1. And how will this affect work incentives and the after-tax distribution of income? Okay, so the initial tax schedule is NT, and then the new one would be NT1. So this means that you can see here, this would be a more progressive income tax because you see that for people who only earn a specific amount of income, they will be paying lesser tax. Okay, and then for people who are paying a higher income, who have a higher income, they will be paying more tax. So you can see it's much steeper, so it's more progressive. So therefore, the work incentives would be weakened, and then there will be a more equal distribution of income. So the answer here would be D. Alright. Question 14. In which labor market diagram is the economic rent of workers greatest? Okay, we need to calculate both the economic rent and also the transfer earnings. So as you can see here, for A, you realize that the supply is perfectly elastic. Therefore, the entire portion below the supply curve and between the point where the quantity is decided, this entire area is your transfer earning. Okay, this is your transfer earning because the supply curve is perfectly elastic. If the supply curve is not perfectly elastic, rather it's something like B, for example, then this particular portion would be your economic rent, and then the portion at the bottom, I'm just going to use red color to represent it, this one would be your transfer earning. Okay, because normally in markets that are perfectly elastic, supply for labor is perfectly elastic. This means that the employer has the rights, or they could be able to choose from so many workers to work in the market, so they don't actually have to worry about paying a higher rent because people would accept the job anyways, because a lot of people are competing for this particular job. So they won't really bother having to pay the economic rent because they know that that factor of production will stay in business. Alright, so if you look at C, the supply curve is perfectly inelastic, therefore the entire portion here would be your economic rent. And then for D, the supply curve is elastic, but it's not very elastic. The entire point here would be your economic rent, and the one on the bottom would be your transfer earning. Okay, so the point or the diagram with the greatest economic rent of workers would have to be C, because the economic rent is the entire area. Okay, for question 15, the government introduces a minimum wage above the equilibrium market wage rate, and how will this affect low-paid workers according to marginal revenue product theory? Okay, so let's look at the four options here. A says all those initially in employment will certainly receive the new minimum wage, incorrect. B, fewer of those not already in employment will enter the labor force, incorrect. C, there will be an increase in the number of low-paid workers, incorrect. And D, some low-paid workers will lose their job. This one is correct. Because if you look here, if we were to use this graph, for example, this is the original wage rate, wage 1, for example, then this one is your this one is your supply of labor, this one is your demand of labor. If you increase your minimum wage to, let's say here, let's say WP, then your supply will increase, but your demand would decrease. So if your demand decreases, then if your demand decreases, then of course some people will lose their jobs. There will be unemployment from this point to this point of the arrow that I drew here. So definitely some low-paid workers will lose their jobs instead of the other three options on top. So answer is D. Question 16, the diagram shows the change in a market when a government places a production quota OQT on the quantity of a good that has previously traded at quantity OQ, and which welfare loss results from the government's policy. A production quota of OQT, so the welfare loss would be X plus Z. Therefore, the answer is C. Right, because you're producing at this point, so the dead weight loss or the welfare loss would be X plus Z, the entire area there. Question 17, the diagram shows a production possibility curve, PPC1. The economy is initially at point X. If the economy achieves actual economic growth but not potential growth, what would be the final position? So point X and then actual economic growth, so it has to be within or on the PPC. If it's outside the PPC, that will be your potential growth, right? So your actual growth would be within or on the PPC curve. So the one that is on the PPC curve or within the PPC curve, and that is outwards of X, that will be B. So the answer here would be B. Question 18, the table shows what happened to the three economic indicators between 2 years in the country, and when would GDP have been the most accurate measure of the standard of living in that country. Okay, so in order to have the GDP being the most accurate measure for standard of living, your population must be constant, because if your population is rising and you calculate based on GDP, of course a rising population would generally mean that the chances of you having a higher GDP would be much higher, because people will have to spend in order to survive. And so if the population is rising, then the GDP, even though it's much higher, would be relatively inaccurate in order to calculate the standards of living in that country, because you're not calculating GDP per capita, you're calculating the entire GDP, right? So C and D would definitely be ruled out. And then your inflation rate must be low and stable, because if it's unstable and it fluctuates, it is very difficult to indicate GDP, because here we also don't know this is nominal GDP or is it real GDP, alright? But of course, in most cases, your inflation rate should be low and stable, and your income distribution must be equal. Therefore, answer is A. Because if your income distribution is equal, this means that people who are much poorer, for example, they will be able to enjoy higher welfare payments, and then people who are much richer, they would have to pay a higher amount of tax. And so in this case, right, they would be able to easily identify, or not to say easily, but then more like they'll be able to have better standards of living. If it's unequal, then it's a bit more difficult to calculate, the standards of living of the average citizen in that country, right? Question 19, which change would directly affect a country's human development index? Okay, human development index, so this would be about basically about human life, for example, basically, right? So A says a change in average hours worked by labor force. This one is not correct. B says a change in life expectancy. This is correct. And C says a change in the level of urbanization. Incorrect. And also D, a change in size of population. Incorrect. So the HDI doesn't take into factor your size of the population. So it doesn't really matter your birth rates and all those. but more like it's more onto your schooling, years of schooling and your life expectancy. So that would be more important. So the answer is B because of that. Question 20, the table gives unemployment rates for 4 countries in 1993 and 2002. And what can be concluded from the table? So unemployment rate in the UK is 10.5 to 5, and then for Japan is basically double, from 2.5 to 5.4. France is from 11.4 to 8.8, and Italy is 10.1 to 8.5. So let's look at the 4 options here. A, it says France had the lowest real employment in both years. Lowest employment rate in both years. So if you look at France, the unemployment rate is 11.4, which means that the employment rate would be about 88.6. And then for 2002, it will be 91.2. If you look at the other countries, the numbers are significantly lower, so that would be concludable. But let's look at the other 3 options here. B, it says Italy had the most employed people in 2002. This is incorrect because, first of all, the unemployment rate is at 8.5%. France is at 8.8, whereas UK and Japan are both lower than Italy and France. Therefore, this is not the answer. And C, says Japan more than doubled its labor productivity between 1993 and 2002. Incorrect. If it doubled its labor productivity between 1993 and 2002, the unemployment rate wouldn't be from 2.5 to 5.4. Okay, so yeah. D, the UK created most jobs between 1993 and 2002. Oh, and also to add on for C, because of the fact that you cannot actually directly compare labor productivity and unemployment, you cannot conclude that from the graph itself, Japan has doubled its labor productivity because there's no proof to see that its labor productivity has doubled. You can only see that the unemployment rates have doubled. But even if labor productivity doubled, doesn't mean that unemployment rates would also double at the same time. Okay? There is no direct relation. There would be unemployment, but there won't be the same rate of unemployment as its labor productivity. And for D, the UK created most jobs between 1993 and 2002. This one is not correct because even though the unemployment rate dropped from 10.5 to 5, that doesn't mean that they created the most jobs. There could be jobs in other countries that people would not want to take. And because of that, right, you can't really conclude that UK created the most jobs. Because from the table alone, you can only see unemployment rates. So we need to choose the one that is the closest to the table. So the answer here would be A. 21, a government in a high-income economy wishes to reduce cyclical unemployment, and which policy is likely to be most effective? Okay, high-income economy wishes to reduce cyclical unemployment. So if you want to reduce cyclical unemployment in a high-income country, then this would be related to your income tax. Alright, so this one will be fiscal policy. You need to increase government expenditure. So if it's A, it says decrease government expenditure. This one is incorrect because cyclical unemployment is basically unemployment caused by a decrease in aggregate demand. And B, it says decrease the government's budget deficit. This one also means decrease expenditure. Actually, decrease budget deficit and increase budget surplus is almost the same thing. So all 3 of these could be ruled out. So the answer here will be C. Question 22, what does the Castles curve represent? It's basically about income inequality. So answer is A. Right. So it's about income inequality. All the others here it's not represented using the Castles curve. Question 23, in an open economy with a government sector, the marginal propensity to import is 0.3, the marginal propensity to tax is 0.3, and the marginal propensity to save is 0.2. And what is the value of the multiplier? So just take 0.3 plus 0.3 plus 0.2, and you get 0.8. So just take 1 divided by 0.8, and you get the answer. So 1 divided by 0.8, we'll get 504, which is 1.25. So the answer here would be A. Question 24, which macroeconomic policy aims are most likely to complement one another? Okay, so if it's high growth and low inflation, no way. Because high growth and low inflation is not exactly possible. High growth means high, which means there's an increase in aggregate demand, When there's an increase in aggregate demand, there's an increase in the price level, which means inflation. Right? B, it says high growth and low unemployment. Yes, this is correct. Because high growth means increase in aggregate demand, which also means that there will be an increase in output, increase in consumption, which results in an increase in output, so people would be able to work. So yes, this is correct. And C, low inflation and low unemployment, incorrect. If there's low unemployment, this means that there's an increase in aggregate demand, and that means that there's an increase in the price level. D, it says low unemployment and the balance of trade surplus, incorrect. Balance of trade surplus, basically, balance of trade surplus, balance of trade is basically your X minus M. Your X minus M is basically much higher when there's low unemployment. But if it's macroeconomic policy, the one that is about macroeconomic policy would be your economic growth, your unemployment, and also inflation. So even though D, it is theoretically correct, but then because when it comes to macroeconomic policy, we're talking about growth and unemployment, therefore the answer here will be B. Question 25, the central bank of a country creates cash to purchase government bonds from the commercial banks, and what is this called? Okay, this one would have to be quantitative easing, so answer is B. Question 26, which statement about government intervention is correct? Alright, so A, it says government failure may result from policies that have unintended side effects. This one is correct. Let's look at the other three and see why see if they are wrong and why they are wrong. B, it says governments cannot identify the existence of inefficiency. Incorrect. Governments can identify the existence of inefficiency, but whether or not the amount of intervention that they use to fix that efficiency is effective or not, that's the problem. C, inefficient government policies mean that the market system will be better at resource allocation. Incorrect. If there are inefficient government policies, the market system would be worse at resource allocation. Okay, so C is incorrect because of that. And D, market failure means that the government action will necessarily improve the situation. Incorrect. Sometimes even if there's market failure, government action doesn't necessarily improve it. Maybe you'll make it worse. So answer is A. Because like what I mentioned in the beginning, government, they cannot identify the amount of intervention that they need to fix the inefficiencies in the economy. 27, all else remaining unchanged, what will result in an outflow of capital funds from the country? So A, it says a fall in the country's real inflation. This one is incorrect. B, it says an expected appreciation of the country's exchange rate. This one is incorrect. And C, it says an increase in foreign interest rate. Yes, is the answer. And D, it says an increase in foreign prices. Wrong. Okay, if there's an increase in foreign prices, then people will be inclined to buy local goods. That's why the capital funds would not flow out of the country. But C, it says the increase in foreign interest rates. Most people would then actually end up saving money in that particular country. And so that's why when that's the case, right, there'll be outflow of capital funds. And then A, fall in the country's real inflation would mean that the price level would decrease, so then people would then be able to buy more stuff. That's why in this case, right, there will be less outflow of capital funds. And B, an expected appreciation of country's exchange rate. There's an expected appreciation, then people would then end up actually sending money into the country. So that's why that's not the answer. Answer is C. 28, in country X, the government aims to protect jobs, and which policy is most likely to succeed? A says decrease restrictions on immigrant labour. Incorrect, because that will allow more foreign labour to come in. And B says decrease subsidies to domestic producers. This will result in people being unemployed. C says increase general tariffs on imports. Correct, because then people buy domestic goods. And D says remove quota on imports, but this will result in imports being being purchased, and then it will result in domestic goods not being purchased, resulting in unemployment. So this is not the answer, so answer is C. Question 29, which row shows characteristics of a fast-growing economy? Alright, so GDP per capita must be rising, so AB is wrong. Birth rate must be decreasing, and your household saving ratio must be increasing, so answer here will be C. Okay, because normally in a fast-growing economy, the birth rate will be relatively lower. People would then spend more time on working rather than actually having a kid, right? Because that's one of the ways for GDP per capita to rise. That means you don't need to actually, you'll be able to spend more on yourself And normally for a fast growing economy, right, there'll be better family planning because of better education, right? And then you'll be able to save more as compared to previously. Question 30, which adjustments to real GDP per capita might make it a more reliable indicator when comparing standards of living in different countries? Right, so A, it says adjustments to allow for differences in the level of government spending in different countries. Nope. Normally, if you want to make it a more reliable indicator, the first thing that you have to do is to also record hidden activity or unexpected economic activity. So B, it says adjustments to allow for differences in rate inflation is incorrect. C, it says adjustments to allow for differences in the amount of economy that is not reported. Yeah, this is the answer. D, it says adjustments to allow for differences in the value of exports. Incorrect. So real GDP per capita, you want to make it a more reliable indicator, you need to record activity that is not reported in order to make sure that you'll be able to really compare the standards of living. Because even though in some cases, even though the GDP per capita is relatively higher, this doesn't mean that the country the standard of living can really be tally with the real GDP per capita. There could be hidden activity that the government doesn't know, so they have to factor that in order to make sure that it is more accurate. So the answer here is C. Alright, so this is the end of this paper. I hope you guys find this video helpful. Do share this video out to other people who may need help with A2 economics. As always, I hope to see you guys again in the next video. Till then, the qiphyedu. Goodbye.